You were lied to about the Wicked Witch of the West, but not in the way you think. For almost 100 years, the Wicked Witch of the West was thought of as just that, wicked, and we had no reason to think otherwise. Sure, her on-screen portrayal was a far departure from her appearance in the original Wizard of Oz book, but even still, both versions of the witch embodied the same qualities. They were cruel and cunning, vindictive and merciless, and I, for one, was terrified of the Wicked Witch when I was a kid. In fact, I was so afraid of her that I used to turn our Wizard of Oz VHS tape so the side that she was on didn't face out because I was scared that she was watching me. I was so stupid. Putting my kid logic aside, though, I know that many of you felt the same type of way about her, and so did the author, Gregory Maguire, who thought there might be more to her story than we were led to believe. Could something have happened to her that made her so wicked? Or was the wickedness something she was born with? A kind of birth defect? Sometime later, his novel, Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West, was released, and transformed the witch, a one-note baddie, into Elphaba, a morally gray social outcast whose supposedly evil deeds were often justified when given the full context. But let's make things more confusing, shall we? Because when Stephen Schwartz and Winnie Holtzman adapted Maguire's book into the banger musical that has now been adapted into a movie, they made Elfie even more empathetic. Any complexity or nuance that Maguire added was thrown out the window in favor of making her a straight-up victim. Elfie from the book and Elfie from the musical are not the same character, and while their life stories have a lot of overlap, they are very different. And just a warning, if all you know about Elfie is from the musical, then you're going to be shocked at some of the things that she does in this story. I think she would be too. Before we dive in though, I just want to give you a heads up that today we are focusing on the second half of her story. Everything that unfolds after the intermission, or as the title implies, in the second movie, Wicked for Good. We talked about the first half in last week's episode, and I recommend you check it out to really maximize what you get out of this one. Also, it's just a good video, but you don't have to. I'll make sure you have all the context you need. After Elfie defies gravity, the musical skips ahead an undisclosed amount of time. The wizard and Morrible have enlisted our girl Glinda into their shady dealings and are basically trying to force a happily ever after on the entire Emerald City populace, with the caveat that if you aren't happy, it's the Wicked Witch's fault. Glinda doesn't seem to actually agree with the dastardly duo's policies, but she plays along, partially out of fear and self-preservation, but also because look at all the free stuff she gets. And best of all, she gets Fiyero, who's now captain of the Emerald City Guard, and her fiancé, despite him obviously being in love with Elfie. Although he'd much rather eat green, it's not exactly feasible considering that she's basically Oz's Bin Laden. And yet again, the Wicked book goes in a similar direction, but it's way lower key. I honestly love how often I see that theme recurring. We established last episode that Elfie's natural-born gifts, where she's basically the spawn of Anakin, Neo, and Superman, are non-existent in the book, and that Book Elphaba actually struggles with magic. Well, we got the same thing this time around. In the musical, she's Oz's most wanted, but in the book, she's a low-level rebel who follows the commands of an anonymous leader. She's barely on anyone's radar, as far as she knows. Similar to the film, the wizard and Morrible are keeping their eye on her, but they aren't broadcasting her image all across Oz because they don't want her to know they know about her.
They don't know that we know they know we know.
Elfie's recent meeting with the wizard and her sudden disappearance from Shiz set off some warning lights in their minds. There was also an incident before she left for Emerald City where Morrible offered Glinda, Elfie, and Nessa Rose an opportunity to work with her and, quote, an authority too high to be named. And Elfie basically blew her off. It's never made clear whether Glinda or Nessa Rose accepted though. I don't think they did, but Morrible claims that she cast a verbal binding spell on them so they couldn't talk to each other about it. So it's not like they could come clean to Elfie if they did. After a few years go by, she shows up on someone else's radar. Fiyero's. He randomly catches sight of her in Emerald City and tries to say hi, but she says that she doesn't know him and runs off. Now, Fiyero was a pretty good friend of Elfie's by the time she left Shiz, so she obviously recognized him. and he knew it. So he used his skills as a hunter and tracker to follow Elphie through the chaotic city streets and to the crappy little apartment that she'd been low-key living in. When Fiyero approaches her again, she tells him to get lost, but he doesn't oblige. Instead, he wants to know where she's been for the past 3 or so years, and she reluctantly fills him in. Now, I wish we had the time to slowly nurture the spark of attraction that these two felt, and really unpack the evolution of the relationship. But I've got a retention time to worry about, so I'm just gonna tell you now, they bang. But these two's relationship isn't quite the opposites attract, Beauty and the Beast, yin and yang love story the musical depicts, because Book Fiyero, while hunky as hell, is not your prototypical Prince Charming. Like Elphie, he's from a marginalized community. He's a Winkie. Which is not a slur, I looked it up. Winkies are the race of people from Oz's western territories. All that Baum told us about them was that they love the color yellow in the same way that Munchkins love blue and Quadlings love red. Which I think is why Fiyero is wearing yellow when he first shows up at Shiz in the graphic novel. But the Wicked novel expands on the Winkie culture a bit, turns them into a tribe with some antiquated beliefs, like arranged marriages. Speaking of, this Fiyero is actually married with a couple of kids, but not to Glinda. His marriage with his wife Sarima was arranged all the way back when they were in diapers, and while he does love her, he is in love with Elphie. So he's surprisingly at peace with continuing their affair in Emerald City, while his wife and her sisters stay behind in their castle out west and watch over the kids. It's not like he and Elphie's relationship is perfect though. They bicker quite a bit over their different worldviews, and there's a lot of tension over Elphie's involvement in the rebellion. Not only the danger that she's putting herself in by rebelling, but all the innocent people that might be hurt in their attempts to hurt the wizard. Elphie writes off these concerns though, because the wizard is hurting innocent people anyway, and the rebellion is a means to an end. So you can see here the very start of Elphie's actions contributing to her wicked reputation. Don't get me wrong, it's not like she was popular before this, but her fellow students at Shiz never saw her as a dangerous threat. At worst, she was just an obnoxious activist who was way too vocal about her opinions. But now those opinions have manifested into actions. Actions that put the very people that she's trying to save at risk. Yes, she's trying to do good, but let's say some Emerald City citizens are killed in a rebel attack. It'd be real easy for the wizard to frame her and her rebel friends as the bad guys, and she doesn't appear to be concerned about that at all. Now, we don't actually get to learn many details about the rebellion, but eventually Elphie is given a high-profile mission, one that, if successful, would force her to go into hiding without Fiyero. That mission is to kill Madame Morrible, but it doesn't go well. As excited as Elphie was to finally stick it to old Fishface and mount her head on a plaque, she was a slippery one, and one step ahead of Elphie. Morrible likely knew that the rebels were out to get her, and that appearing in public put her at risk, so she made sure to surround herself with innocent little schoolgirls that not even the most guerrilla rebel would be willing to sacrifice to take her out. And while Elphie was out waiting to shoot her shot, the wizard's militia, who had been following her and her rebel friends for some time, broke into her apartment and ambushed Fiyero, beating him so badly that when Elphie returned home, the apartment stank with the smell of iron, and her boots stuck to the floor from layers of dried blood. Between failing at her biggest opportunity to help the cause yet, and losing the man that she loved, literally, she lost him, she doesn't know where he is or if he's alive or dead, this might be the worst day of Elphie's life. Understandably so, she has a bit of a mental breakdown and turns herself over to the local nuns to be looked after. Now, Elphie also loses Fiyero to the Emerald City Guards in the musical. After he confesses his love for Elphie and leaves Glinda for her, he takes a stroll down the yellow brick road to visit Elphie's Emerald City. And once you go green, you stay on that team. Later on though, when Elphie is arrested, he convinces the guards to let her go free by threatening to blast Glinda's face off. After which he's arrested, tortured, and mounted on some poles in a cornfield. Remind you of anybody? I think it's safe to say that both witches are at their respective rock bottoms right now, but their stories are far from over. Elphie has to be a bit more traumatized before she can become the Wicked Witch that we all know, love, and fear. You know, if the Wicked Witch really wanted to help out her reputation or broadcast the truth about the wizard's evil deeds, there are more effective methods than skywriting. It would have done her wonders to have a website where Ozians could go to learn all that information. Unfortunately for her, she didn't know about our sponsor, Squarespace, because they've made the website building process so easy that it's borderline sorcery at this point. Whether you make art, run a business, or run a business that makes art, you could benefit from having a website. It makes it so much easier to stand out from the crowd and convert visitors into clients and customers. And thanks to Squarespace's cutting-edge AI tools like Design Intelligence, you don't have to do any of the heavy lifting yourself. Just tell the nice robot what kind of website you need and answer some questions about your brand. From there, it'll generate everything that you and your customers could want. That could be a blog where you share your thoughts on the questionable fashion choices of Munchkins, a playlist for your music, a calendar for your clients to book appointments, or even a shelf to sell merchandise. I also use them to build my own website, messeduporigins.com. To try Squarespace yourself, you could go to squarespace.com/Jon Solo or hit the link in the description to start a free trial. Then when you realize you love it, use code Jon Solo at checkout to get 10% off. You already know that Elphie is primed to be the Wicked Witch of the West, but have you ever thought about how she got out west? No? Well, I'm gonna tell you anyway. The next section of the book skips ahead 7 years. Elphie is leaving the nunnery that took her in and that she spent the last few years volunteering for, helping the old, the sick, and the needy. And she's heading out west on what equates to Oz's Oregon Trail. The Ozian Trail. I would definitely play that game, although I can already tell you how I die. Now, Oz's western territory is known as the Vincus. It's also Oz's largest territory, but the least inhabitable due to the rough terrain and dry climate. Elphie, along with a caravan of other travelers, have to make their way through deserts and grasslands, up mountains, and even across a raging river, which Elphie uses an ice spell to allow her to walk on top of without getting wet. And while she does ultimately reach her destination safely, long, arduous journeys like that tend to change people, and you're going to want to hear about some of these developments, especially if you're a fan of Baum's original Woz book. To keep a long story short, it's on this journey that she recruits her most menacing minions. She climbs a tree and adopts a hive of bees, which most people in the caravan are not happy about, but she supplies them with honey to propitiate them. Don't think it's worth it.
Is that your end game here, honey?
Yeah, I figure we keep the hive in the basement, we'll always have honey.
We'll always have bees, is what we'll always have.
Wow!
Then, after the bees attack the caravan's cook by stinging his throat in his sleep so he can't scream, and then chasing him off a cliff, Elphie adopts his dog, Killjoy. A bit later, while crossing that river I mentioned, Killjoy finds and tries to eat a baby snow monkey that was abandoned by his troop, but Elphie pulls the monkey out of his mouth before the dog can crush his skull. Then she names him Chistery for some reason. And the final addition to her ferocious four were her crow familiars, who were given to her by an ancient elephant named Princess Nastoya that ruled over a nomadic tribe in the Vincus. Now, if you've only seen the Wizard of Oz movie, then you're probably a little confused about when these pets come into play. But stick around and you'll see for yourself. Oh, and one more pretty important detail that I think everyone is going to want to hear: someone else was traveling alongside Elphie, someone that she had known for years but never really cared about, and still doesn't really. It was her son, Lear. And while Lear didn't know it, the castle that the caravan had pulled up to belonged to his father. He and Elphie had just arrived at the gates of Kiamoko. But just to make sure that we're all on the same page, Lear is Fiero's son, and Elphie is his mother. But she's not a very good one. It's funny because in one of the earlier scripts for the Wizard of Oz movie, their witch was also given a son. His name was going to be Bulbo, and she would have attempted to take over all of Oz just so he could rule it. Elphie doesn't care nearly as much about Lear. Now, some might argue that she was in a depressed stupor for the majority of her pregnancy and barely remembered giving birth to him, so she has disturbingly little attachment to him. But my counter-argument to that is, that's her child. There's no excuse. You'll see the extent of her detachment soon enough. First, we gotta talk about why Elphie is at Kiamoko in the first place. She's got a simple plan, but not the kind that would do anything to hold you in her arms. She wants to confess to Fiero's wife Sarima that she may be responsible for his death. She wants Sarima to forgive her. Then, she wants to go off-grid forever. But per usual, this doesn't go according to her plan. You see, it's custom at Kiamoko to welcome visitors with open arms, and because of the brutal weather conditions in the mountains, sometimes house them for months at a time. This is what happened with Elphie. Upon arriving at the castle, she met with Sarima and wasted no time in confessing that she caused Fiero's death. But she did not get the response that she expected. Sarima says that Elphie is not the only one to have confessed this, and that she would rather not discuss her husband's death because it's a sensitive subject and knowing more about what happened to him isn't going to make her feel any better. She basically has enough information to form her own conclusions and would rather just stick with those, even if they're wrong, than create more confusion in herself. Besides, Sarima knows that Elphie only wants to admit guilt to make herself feel better. Now, this complete shutdown by Sarima was already a struggle for Elphie to accept, but it's made even more difficult by them having to live together for months after this because winter had rolled in and she couldn't risk getting caught in the snow. This would absolutely pay off for her in the end though, because not only did she manage to make some genuine friends out of Sarima and her sisters, but this arrangement would lead to her inheriting a whole ass castle. Before we get to that though, some pretty noteworthy events go down during Elphie's time as a guest at Kiamoko. For starters, she finds the Grimoire. It was just sitting in the castle attic collecting dust, and Sarima said that Elphie could have it because she couldn't read anyway. Now, I'm not going to tell you too much about the Grimoire in this episode because some important details aren't revealed until the sequels, and I don't want to spoil those for anyone planning on reading them. What I can tell you is that the Grimoire was a book of mysticism, sorcery, and magic, and that it was inspired by the Lesser Key of Solomon, a 5-part magical textbook that was compiled in the 17th century by even older sources that described how to summon, bind, and communicate with various supernatural beings, mostly demons, but also angels and spirits. The Grimoire from the book is less demon-focused, but contains plenty of other dangerous information. There are blueprints for torture devices, spells for manipulating time, and even a recipe for poison apples. But how did this thing end up at Kiamoko? That's pretty random. The musical doesn't bother to give many details about its origins, but they don't really have to. It just makes sense that the wizard would have it. He's the wizard, not an illiterate queen. It turns out that Sarima agreed to hide the Grimoire as a favor to a complete stranger. An old sorcerer in tattered rags just showed up on her doorstep one day, claiming he was from some other world. He presented her with the Grimoire, told her that it was filled with knowledge from his world and that it was too threatening to stay there, but also too powerful to be destroyed, so he needed her to hide it. And what'd Sarima do? She took the book without question and threw it in a pile with all the others that she couldn't read. But what might be the most important difference between the book and the musical is that the book's Elphie can only read part of it, where in the adaptation, she's the only one who can read it, without extensive training at least. This will come up later in the book, so keep it in mind. Even a partially legible spellbook has its benefits though, so Elphie spends a lot of time trying to read it, study it, and practicing in her private room in the southeast tower of the castle. This is also around the time that she starts trying to teach Chistery to speak. You remember Chistery, right? In the musical, he's the monkey that Elphie horrifically disfigures by cursing him to sprout wings. Well, this Chistery doesn't have wings yet, but just wait because he will. And I think there was one other pretty important thing that went down at Kiamoko. What was it again? That's right, Elphie's son almost died. You see, Lear is about as beta as a kid can get. Fiero's other kids bully him constantly, not because he's their bastard brother, neither they nor Lear even know about that, but because he never stands up for himself. He just whimpers and cries and almost always gives in to peer pressure. For the record, I don't blame the kid for being like this. He didn't have a dad around to toughen him up, and his mom wasn't the least bit supportive of him, as you're about to see. One day, when the kids were playing hide and seek, one of the boys, Manic, encouraged Lear to hide in the fish well, which, to my understanding, was a well in the castle cellar that connected to a body of water below the castle where they trapped fish. Manic lowers Lear into the well, seals it shut with a stone slab, then promptly forgetabouts him, as does everyone else, for several days. Well, Elphie did notice that he was missing at dinner time, but she didn't care enough to look for him, which might actually be worse. Eventually, who knows exactly how long after this, the kids find Lear in the well. He was cold, wet, ghost white, and barely alive. Elphie, Sarima, and her sisters managed to pull Lear's body out of the well, take off his wet clothes, and heat him up by the fire. He is still not responsive though, and Elphie has no choice but to give him CPR. Meanwhile, Manic is watching this all go down, laughing and making jokes at poor Lear's expense. And just when the group was starting to lose hope, Lear coughed up some water. He was alive and would survive, although it sounded like he had a weird experience down in that well. Lear said there was a golden carp down there who told him that she was magic and that he was Fiero's son. I'm thinking this carp has gotta be old fish face herself, Madame Morrible, either changed into a fish or communicating through a fish familiar, and Elphie considers the same thing, although she doesn't have a way to prove it yet. Now, while Lear may have survived his time in the well, this whole ordeal did lead to another death, Manic's, Fiero's oldest son. Not long after this went down, Manic was walking through the castle grounds when an icicle fell from above and impaled his brain. And while we don't have any physical evidence of foul play or supernatural sabotage, Elphie just so happened to be there on the scene to witness his death firsthand. Just a coincidence, or was this her punishing him for his relentless abuse of Lear? We're never told for sure, but one thing is for certain. Elphie thinks he deserved it. One of the things that I liked the most about the Wicked musical when I saw it at the Oriental Theater in Chicago all the way back in 2006 was that it gave these characters I had known my whole life backstories that were deep, meaningful, and messed up. Yeah, my morbid curiosity didn't start with messed up origins. It's been around for a while. But here's the thing that I didn't know at the time. Characters like the Tin Man, Scarecrow, and Cowardly Lion already had backstories in Baum's original book. So when Maguire wrote the Wicked book, he used L. Frank Baum's characters, while the musical leans more into the movie. So in the musical, Elphie decides to drop in on her sister, who's now the mayor of Munchkinland, after going off-grid for an undisclosed amount of time. This actually happens pretty early in the second half, but the equivalent moment in the book doesn't happen until the second half of the second half. Yeah, so we're going to be jumping around the timeline a little bit, but I'll do my best to keep it organized. Now, before Book Elphie even considers reuniting with her family and friends, she receives an unexpected visitor at Kian-Moko, Nanny, one of the 3 to 4 people in her life that she had a soft spot for. She was ecstatic to see Nanny, if you can imagine Elphie ecstatic, and Nanny caught her up on all the goings-on in Munchkinland. Namely that Nessa Rose finally inherited the title of Eminent Throp, basically Munchkinland's governor. This was actually Elphie's birthright, but she had no interest in it, so it got passed to her sister. Not long after this, Elphie witnesses Fiero's daughter, Noor, flying on her magic broom, which was especially shocking to see because not even Elphie had flown on it yet. She was given the broom during her time at the nunnery by Mother Yackle, who told her that it'd be connected to her destiny, which is either referring to the fact that the wizard is going to demand it as proof that she's dead, or it's talking about something that happens in a future book, because I know that other characters end up using her broom. Oh, and in case you forgot, Yackle is the same gypsy lady that made Elphie's mom that medicine to prevent Nessa from being green, which I guess worked. And although she got the broom years ago, she never knew it could fly until she saw Noor hanging from it 60 feet in the air. This motivated her to attempt the same thing, albeit with a lot more control. And after about a week, she was confident enough to take a long-distance flight to Munchkinland, which her father had just revealed in a letter had seceded from Emerald City's control. When Elphie visits Nessa Rose in the musical, some serious shit goes down. For starters, she uses her magic to enchant Nessa's silver shoes and give her the ability to walk for the first time in her life. But when Nessa finds out that Bach isn't as shallow as she thought, and that her condition had nothing to do with him not loving her, she tries putting a spell on him to make him love her. But all this ends up doing is causing his heart to reverse Grinch. It shrunk 3 sizes that day. Elphie does what she can to save Bach's life, but without a heart, his body would shut down. So she had to transform his body into something that didn't need blood. Tin, I guess. And when he sees what cursed fate these sisters brought down upon him, he declares them his enemies for life. That's right, if you didn't know it already, Bach becomes the Tin Man. Although he's absolutely not the Tin Man from Baum's original book. His name was Nick Chopper, and we're gonna talk about him in a minute. Bach was the rich munchkin that gave Dorothy a warm meal and a place to sleep before she started down the yellow brick road. Although I stupidly didn't bother to mention this part in the messed up origins of The Wizard of Oz because I didn't realize it was connected to Wicked. My bad. I'm getting ahead of myself though. In the book, Elphie pays a visit to Nessa Rose, who's now living in the extravagant Throp estate, and she sees, for the first time ever, that Nessa can walk with perfect balance. She doesn't need Nanny to give her support, which is why Nanny came to Kiamoko. In this version, it was Glinda the Good who enchanted the slippers, as she'd grown quite close with Nessa during her last few years at school. The musical portrays Glinda as kind of an imposter with no real magical ability, kind of like the wizard, but she is a talented sorceress in the book, which she would have to be to maintain continuity with the originals. Nessa Rose has also become quite the mystic herself, and the local populace has given her a nickname that she rather likes, the Wicked Witch of the East. Elphie hangs around the estate for a few days, asking her father questions about her childhood, which only seems to add more baggage to the pile, and watching Nessa manage the many problems that the Munchkinlanders come to her to solve. One of which involves an old Munchkin lady, her servant girl, and Nick Chopper. In the original Wizard of Oz book, the Tin Man tells Dorothy that he was engaged to a gorgeous Munchkin girl and he was gonna whisk her away from her life of servitude. But her old hag of a master didn't want to lose her only servant, so she had the Wicked Witch of the East bewitch his axe to chop off his limbs. And he basically got Ship of Theseus, replaced one piece at a time until he was made entirely of tin. The Wicked book actually adds some more context though. That old hag had actually lost 3 sons to the war effort, so maintaining her farm fell completely on her and her servant. If she lost that extra set of hands, pun not intended, then her crops would spoil and she'd be financially ruined and would probably starve to death. So you can understand her concern a little more now. Not that it justifies dismembering an innocent man. There was for sure some middle ground between those two options. Her sob story isn't all that interesting to Elphie anyway. What actually convinces her and Nessa to get involved is that the old woman owns a sheep and a cow. That is, with a capital S and C, meaning they can talk and live in human society. And she said that she would free them if the witches helped her. So they did. But get this, the animals aren't even thankful because the sheep has basically gone full lowercase at this point, and the cow knows that someone else is just gonna slaughter her for meat. So this was super not worth it. And so that running theme of Elphie trying to help, but just making things worse for everybody, is still going strong. Eventually, her time in Munchkinland had to come to an end though. So she said her goodbyes to her dad and to Nessa, without realizing this was the last time that she'd see her sister alive. Before saddling up and heading back to Kiamoko though, the subject of the silver shoes came up, and Nessa told Elphie that she'll rewrite her will so Elphie gets them when she dies. A decision that I am sure will be respected when the time comes. But Elphie has quite the surprise waiting for her back at the castle, and it's not a good one. When she returns to Kiamoko, the entire royal family is missing. Sarima, her 6 sisters, and 2 children, Nor and Irji. It turns out that Emerald City soldiers arrested them all. Elphie was the only one in that castle who could put up a fight, so when the soldiers got word that she was across the country, they capitalized on their vulnerable state and imprisoned them all. The only ones left behind were her pets, Nanny, and Lear, because as far as the soldiers knew, they weren't part of the royal family, and therefore not a threat to the wizard's rule. But Lear followed the soldiers to their camp anyway because he thought they were cool and was that desperate for a masculine role model. And now's the time for Elphie to show just how much of a fight that she can put up. She's been studying her grimoire and her animal sidekicks are riled up and ready for action. So she gasses up her broomstick and mounts a rescue mission. I sure wish I could tell you really anything about the rescue mission, but the story just skips ahead 7 years. Again, we don't get to hear any details about the mission either, besides that it was a complete and total failure. Not only did she not rescue them, I don't think she even found them. She did find Lear tied up in a barn though, so she didn't come back empty-handed. There are plenty of exciting moments to be had in this section though, because it's when Elphie fully embraces her identity as the Wicked Witch, and we get to see how all of this connects to the events of Baum's original story. There's also a lot to unpack in this section, so if I did forget something or happen to leave out your personal favorite detail, let me know in a comment. Just don't be a witch about it. Now, in the musical, Madame Morrible wants to lure Elphie out of hiding and decides the best way of doing this is to kill one of the only people that she cares about, which she goes about by doing in the most convoluted way possible, by summoning a cyclone to tear through Kansas and using said cyclone to carry a house from Kansas to Oz and drop it on Nessa's head. Even with her talent for manipulating weather, that seems like an awfully roundabout way of killing her, doesn't it? Unless the original plan was for the cyclone itself to take her out and it showing up in Kansas was unintentional. Either way, an awful lot of luck was required to pull this off. Either the Madam's good luck or Nessa Rose's bad luck. When it comes to the book, the explanation for the tornado is kept ambiguous, but we're told that a number of terrorist groups try to take credit for it, so someone could be at fault. If this version of Morrible were responsible though, then she severely overestimated how much Elphie cared about her sister. No joke, when she gets the news that she was killed, she just puts the letter down and goes back to her science experiment, which, by the way, entailed sewing wings on monkeys. That's right, in the musical, she is mortified at the idea that she just mutated this innocent creature and caused it totally unnecessary suffering. In the book, she cares just as much about animals, but she doesn't seem to have any conflicts about doing experiments on them now, even when those experiments go wrong and she has no choice but to kill them to end their suffering. I know that she's something of a scientist herself and that science requires sacrifice, but there's some undeniable cognitive dissonance going on. Unless this is meant to show how far her values have fallen since Shiz, or maybe what extreme lengths she's willing to go to prove that monkeys can fly. She is still trying to teach Chistery to talk though, which is consistent with her musical counterpart. Now, as love-hate as her relationship with her sister was, she flies over to Munchkinland to attend the memorial service and check on her father, who is now mostly blind, in a wheelchair, and heartbroken over his favorite daughter's death. There's actually a really sweet moment where he wells up, and as the tears stream down his face, Elphie dries them off for him, even though the moisture burns her skin, showing that despite how he's mistreated her, she still loves her dad and would sacrifice her own well-being for his. You know who else attends the memorial though? Glinda the Good. Only her reunion with Elphie is far less tense than the adaptation, where words fall to the wayside and are replaced by bitch slaps, batons, and broomsticks. Instead, they get along great, complimenting and teasing each other simultaneously like old friends. There is a little bit of tension over the fact that Glinda gave away Nessa's slippers, which are now legally Elphie's property, but the matter isn't quite as clear-cut as all that. Glinda argues that she had just as much a right to those slippers as Elphie. After all, it was her enchantment that made them magical, and kept them from falling apart with Nessa wearing them day in and day out. Not to mention that Glinda was more of a sister to Nessa Rose these last 15 years than Elfie was. She abandoned Nessa at Shiz, stopped by Munchkin Land once a decade later, and then disappeared again. Glinda is actually surprised that Elfie wants them at all, considering how little she cared for Nessa and the fact that they straight up aren't her style. It was never really about Nessa though. For Elfie, these shoes were a symbol of her father's love. He painstakingly made them bead by bead for his armless angel. He had never given Elfie anything that required the same love and devotion, but in her eyes, she deserved that and thinks that the slippers, or shoes, will fill that void. She doesn't say that all out loud though. Instead, she says she doesn't want the wizard to take them, although I doubt that he'd even fit into them. Personally, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on who you think should have them, so comment down below. As for Glinda, she tells Elfie that if she wants them to just go ahead and get them from Dorothy, but just don't hurt her because she didn't mean to kill Nessa or travel to Oz in the first place. And Elfie reluctantly agrees. Then Glinda slides in at the end there that having the shoes won't make Elfie's dad love her, which probably stung worse than the slap. And this was the last conversation they'd ever have. Now in the musical, Elfie has one more interaction with the wizard where she agrees to work with him if he frees the flying monkeys. So he does. But then she backs out when she sees that he's been holding Dillon prisoner and he's now gone full lowercase. In the book, she meets with him after he comes to town for Nessa's memorial service, and they have a similar kind of exchange. But this wizard is infinitely less charming and persuasive than in the musical. He reminds me of the architect in The Matrix. Ergo, he's a pretentious douche.
I have since come to understand that the answer eluded me because it required a lesser mind, or perhaps a mind less bound by the parameters of perfection.
He wants Elfie to give him the grimoire and to forget about these silver shoes. And in return, she wants Fiero's family to be released from prison. Here's the problem though, the wizard doesn't actually know which prison or prisons they were sent to. But by now, they're surely dead. The only survivor is Fiero's daughter, Noor, who he brings into the room to show her sad state. She's filthy, in short chains that force her to walk hunched over, and she doesn't speak. Oh, and he's not going to release her because she's basically the perfect human shield from Elfie. So, like the musical, she refuses his offer because there was basically nothing in it for her. There is a little more to their meeting than this, but I'm just going to save the rest for the end because it ties in with how the musical concludes. After her meeting with the wizard, Elfie stops by Box House for a quick little catch-up. And unlike the musical, this dude is winning at life. He's got a great big house, and not just by Munchkin standards, mind you. He's got a hot wife and beautiful kids. He's rich, and that alien goddess girl that descended from the sky actually stayed in their house a few nights ago. And she was lovely. But when the topic of Madame Morrible comes up, it hits Elfie like a ton of bricks. That woman was still in the wizard's pocket, molding Oz's greatest up-and-coming minds how he saw fit. And just like that, it was time for Elfie to leave Box House and finish the mission that she started more than a decade ago. She had to kill Madame Morrible. Only, spoiler alert, she would fail this time around too, albeit in a very different way. Elfie plays up her role as a former student to get past all of Morrible's secretaries and assistants and visit the madam in her personal quarters, only to find out that she's already dead. It turns out that Morrible was getting up there in age and had been in poor health for some time. She had taken her last breath only 5 minutes before Elfie came through the door. But that didn't stop the Wicked Witch from grabbing a trophy with the biggest marble bust that she could find and bashing her skull in. Very different than her fate in the musical, but we'll get to that. Well, as thrilled as Elfie is that Morrible is dead, you can tell that she's not quite as satisfied as she had hoped, given that she didn't actually kill her. Still, that doesn't stop her from taking credit for the murder or getting really drunk to celebrate. She was actually too drunk to fly home that night, but a few days later, she was back at Kian-Moko. And when she arrives, Lear tells her that he finally caught the golden carp, the one that he said talked to him when he was trapped in the well all those years ago. But now, it's dead. Isn't that timing just a little too perfect? The fish dying the very same week that Morrible dies? Between that and all the references to her looking like a carp, it can't be a coincidence. Not to mention that inside scoop about being Fiero's son that the carp gave Lear all those years ago, which Morrible likely knew because the wizard's agents were following Elfie back then. This isn't the only update that Lear gives Elfie though. Word on the road was they were about to have some visitors. If you're like me and nerd out over Easter eggs, references, and creative, subtle connections to source material, you're gonna love this section. It doesn't sync up perfectly with the events of the original book, but it's about as close as one can reasonably get, while also taking inspiration from the movie. So Lear tells Elfie that Dorothy and her companions, a scarecrow, a tin man, and a lion, were told by the wizard that he'll only grant their wishes if they kill the Wicked Witch of the West, and to bring her broom as proof, and that the assassins are on their way now. Then Lear asks Elfie an interesting question that I also want you to comment your answers to down below. What would she ask for if the wizard could grant her any wish? And her response surprised even her. She said, a soul. As for Lear, his wish might be the saddest thing you hear all day. What his heart desires isn't money or power or the Ozian equivalent of a PlayStation 5. All he wants is a father. Now, as the weeks go by, Elfie reflects on who Dorothy's companions might be. She knew the Tin Man was Nick Chopper. She thought the Lion might be the same one from Dr. Nicky Dick's class since she heard he was unusually timid, but she can't place the Scarecrow, which scares her. She's worried that the Scarecrow might be someone else from her past, but then she gets a little hope in her heart, because Fiero's body was never found. Could he be making his way back home to her in disguise? I'm assuming this is where the musical writers Schwartz and Holtzman got the idea to make him the Scarecrow in the musical. In that story, after Fiero is mounted in the field, he is tortured for information, but a spell that Elfie casts protects him from all pain and death. In exchange, though, he's turned into a scarecrow, which he's a pretty good sport about, all things considered. It remains to be seen whether the book Scarecrow is Fiero. Just because their names kinda rhyme don't mean shit. Eventually, Elfie gets word that Dorothy and her friends are at the base of the mountain and will soon ascend to Kiamoko. But instead of attacking her would-be killers, she tries to welcome them. Specifically Fiero, by sending her dog Killyjoy and the rest of his pack to lead them to the castle. Unfortunately, the appearance of a couple dozen wolf dogs scared the group, so they took it as a sign of aggression, and the Tin Man chopped the dogs to pieces with his axe, just like in the original story. Naturally, this infuriates Elfie, so she sends her crow familiars to attack the assassins, but the Scarecrow goes beyond scaring them. He manages to snatch them out of the air one by one and snap their necks. Next came her swarm of bees, but they were rendered completely ineffective thanks to the Scarecrow disassembling himself to hide Dorothy, the lion, and that annoying little dog in his straw. Meanwhile, the bees tried to sting the Tin Man and all died. Now, because Elfie had gotten up close and personal with Fiero, she knew that he didn't have the ability to spontaneously disintegrate into a pile of straw, so the Scarecrow must not be him. What a bummer. And at this point, her patience had worn thin. She no longer had any interest in him or the Tin Man, but she did consider that Dorothy and her lion friend might be useful allies in her fight against the wizard. So she sent her monkeys to carry Dorothy and the lion the rest of the way to the castle, a move that in the original story is described as an abduction, not a taxi service. Also in the original story, the witch wanted to strap a saddle to the lion and ride him around like a horse, but her intentions with him in this version are a little more serious. She wants him to teach her everything that he can about capital A animals, and possibly gather animal allies if a war broke out. When the monkeys drop Dorothy off at the castle, she receives a weird welcome, which she had gotten accustomed to at this point. Nanny and Lear invited Dorothy and the lion in for dinner, and soon after, Elfie comes face to face with her for the first time. From the moment they meet, Dorothy is apologetic about killing Nessa Rose, a detail that is consistent with the movie, but not the original story since Baum never mentioned the witches being sisters. Dorothy is actually so apologetic and empathetic and just straight up kind-hearted that it kind of annoys the ultra-cynical Elphie, who I think wanted to believe this girl was way overrated. I mean, Dorothy was going around telling people that her name meant Goddess of Gifts, which is actually backwards. Dorothy means gift of God and is actually the feminine version of Theodore. Still, that name carried a lot of weight with the superstitious people of Oz, as did the wizard's name, Oswald. Now combine that with her surviving a fall from the sky with nary a scratch, and who can really blame them for thinking that she's divine? Eventually, though, Elphie gets sick of wearing the mask of a gracious host. She orders Chistery to throw Toto down the fish well, which has got to be a reference to when Chistery chases him out of the castle in the movie. From this point on, the situation descends into chaos. Also, like the movie, people are running all over the place. The lion runs off to rescue Toto, the Tin Man and Scarecrow are breaking into the castle to rescue Dorothy, Lear is trying to help them for some reason, and Nanny still thinks that there's dinner going on, so she's making her way up the tower steps with some tea and crumpets, before Elphie trips her and she falls down the stairs. Dorothy also tries to run away, and Elphie, with her burning broom in hand, chases her onto the parapet, where they have their final face-off, which is kind of a mix between the book and movie. See, in Baum's book, the witch trips Dorothy, knocking off one of these silver slippers, so Dorothy gets pissed and throws a bucket of water on the witch, not realizing it would kill her. In that universe, the witch was so evil that her blood dried up years before, so the first hint of moisture and she'd melt like brown sugar. In the movie, the witch lights the Scarecrow on fire and Dorothy throws the water to save him, but it hits the witch and she melts into a puddle. We aren't told why she melts, but that's fine. I'm just happy the scary witch is gone. As for the Wicked book, Elphie accuses Dorothy of coming to kill her and steal the Grimoire, but Dorothy says that she doesn't know what she's talking about. Elphie then demands that Dorothy take off the shoes, and the girl reveals that she's tried, but they're stuck. Not even the wizard could get them off. Tensions are high right now, and Elphaba Throp has run out of patience. She says that Dorothy is her soul come scavenging for her, and that she doesn't want a soul, because that would mean everlastingness, and life has tortured her enough already. Typical emo cousin at Thanksgiving shit. As you can imagine, Dorothy is scared out of her mind, and she comes totally clean. Yes, the wizard did send them to kill her, but this wasn't actually her intention. She was only there to apologize and hopefully be forgiven for killing her sister, because she'll never be able to forgive herself. Hearing this sends Elphie into a spiral. This girl was the bane of her existence, her mortal enemy, yet she made the dangerous trek all the way to Kiamoko for forgiveness. The exact same reason that Elphie came here 7 years ago, so Surima would forgive her for the role that she played in Fiero's death. Could Elphie really give Dorothy the same forgiveness that she sought and was denied? We'll never know, because at that moment an ember from the burning broom landed on her cloak and it caught fire. Going up in a blaze wasn't what killed her though. It was the so-called Goddess of Gifts, who tried to save the witch by dousing her with a bucket of water. It only took a second for Elphie to realize that she was dying, and as she laid there, cradled by the young goddess who tried to say soothing things, the witch reflected on her life. She thought of the people that she helped and hurt, the ones whose stories are still going on, Nor and Lear and even the wizard, and she mourned that she would never know how they end. Then, the Wicked Witch died. And I mean really died. They totally fake you out in the musical, but after Dorothy leaves Oz, Fiero the Scarecrow goes back to his family's old castle and gives Elphie the all clear to come out of hiding. Then the two get to live happily ever after. No such luck in the book, I'm afraid, although we do get a peek at what everyone's up to on the night that she died. Lady Glinda is at her sprawling estate, feeling restless and unable to sleep, although she doesn't know why. Frex is in Munchkinland, wondering why Elphie was born with such sharp teeth. And the wizard is in Emerald City, wondering how much more time he has until his luck runs out. Over the next few weeks, word of Elphie's death spreads, and it becomes a celebrated event all across Oz, basically what we saw at the start of the musical. But when Dorothy and her friends reported the news to the wizard, he had an unusual reaction. That's right, there's one silver shoe still waiting to drop. Dorothy brought him 2 pieces of evidence that she was at the witch's house when she died. She didn't grab the grimoire because it was too heavy, but she did have the broom and a little green bottle with a torn label on it that used to read, Miracle Elixir. The moment that she showed him that bottle, he gasped and clutched his heart. He remembered that bottle. He gave it to a woman he had a one-night stand with, a gorgeous and easily coerced woman who enjoyed the dreamlike visions the elixir gave her. That woman was Melina Thropp, Elfie's mother. The wizard had just ordered his own daughter's assassination, and upon realizing this, he decided it was time to leave Oz immediately. So to those wondering why Elfie was born with the unique features that she was, you have your explanation. She was a child of both worlds. And all the drugs that her mom did while she was pregnant. But the child of 2 world things for sure. This revelation is also made at the end of the musical, but it's Glinda who shows the wizard the bottle and tells him that it belonged to Elfie's mother. And here, her belonging to both worlds is what made her so powerful and capable of reading the grimoire. Whether you go with the musical or the book, Elfie's life was a tragedy, cursed at birth to be different from everyone she met, a perpetual loner who felt at odds with the world around her. But legends aren't forged in comfort. They're carved out of pain, sacrifice, and an iron will that refuses to let the world break you. There's no denying that the Wicked Witch of the West is a legend, and both versions of her backstory prove the same thing. Sometimes the only difference between a hero and a villain is who gets to tell the story. In Oz, her story was told for her by people with money, power, and influence. When they realized that she wasn't like them, they twisted her courage into chaos, her warnings into wickedness, and her fight for justice into a threat to their control that had to be eliminated. But if you actually look at her life, at everything she endured and everything she tried to fix, that line between villain and victim starts to blur. And that is the real tragedy of Elphaba Thropp. She wasn't born wicked. The world just found it easier to call her that than to understand her. All she wanted was to make a difference, to have a positive impact on Oz and its citizens. Now, who can say whether she changed Oz for the better, but one thing is for certain. She changed it for good.